The Montana forest lay buried under a heavy winter hush, where snow softened every sound and the wind whispered through frozen pines like an old, forgotten prayer. Ethan Walker, a 42-year-old man with a broad, weathered frame and a face carved by years of fire and loss, lived alone in a worn wooden cabin at the edge of that silence. His dark hair, now streaked with gray, was kept short but unruly, and a thick, untrimmed beard shadowed a jaw that once carried quiet confidence, but now held something heavier: fatigue, maybe regret. His pale blue eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that missed nothing, yet seemed to look past the present, as if searching for something that no longer existed. Ethan had once been a firefighter, the kind of man people trusted when everything else was falling apart. But a tragic rescue gone wrong, one he never spoke about, had hollowed something inside him, leaving behind a man who preferred the company of trees over people. Each morning, he followed the same ritual. Coffee brewed strong and bitter, hands wrapped around the warmth, eyes scanning the tree line from his porch. It wasn't curiosity that drove him, it was habit, the kind that fills the quiet spaces where memories like to creep in. That was when he saw her. At the edge of the clearing stood a gray wolf. She was large, lean, her thick winter coat dusted with snow, blending almost perfectly into the pale world around her. Her posture was alert but not aggressive, muscles coiled with quiet strength. Amber eyes locked onto Ethan, not with fear, not with threat, but with something older, something that didn't need explanation. Ethan didn't move. Years of instinct told him to respect distance, to understand that some lines once crossed could never be undone. Still, something about her lingered. He set his mug down slowly, stepped back inside, and returned with a small piece of raw meat. Without a word, he walked halfway across the porch and placed it on the snow, far enough to keep the space between them intact. The wolf did not move. For a long moment, neither did Ethan. Then he turned, walked back into the cabin, and closed the door behind him. From the window, he watched. The wolf stepped forward only after he was gone. The wolf returned at dawn, as if she belonged to the hour when light and darkness had not yet chosen sides, and the world itself seemed unsure whether to be kind or cruel. Ethan noticed the pattern before he admitted it to himself. Every few mornings, never too close together, she would appear at the same edge of the clearing, always silent, always watching. He adjusted his routine without thinking. Some days he left food, other days he didn't. It wasn't hesitation, it was discipline. Years as a firefighter had taught him that helping without understanding could make things worse. Dependency, in the wild, was just another form of slow death. The wolf accepted his terms. She never approached while he stood outside, never begged, never lingered longer than necessary. When the meat was there, she would wait until he retreated, then cross the open snow with measured, fluid steps, take what was offered, and vanish again into the trees like a shadow reclaiming itself. Ethan began to study her without meaning to, the way her head lifted slightly before stepping forward, testing the air, the subtle shift of her ears, always listening beyond what the eye could see. She was not desperate. She was calculating, and that, somehow, made him respect her more. One morning, something changed. Ethan stepped onto the porch, the cold biting through the fabric of his jacket, and paused. The snow held a story he hadn't seen before. Beside the familiar, elongated tracks of the wolf were smaller prints, uneven, closer together, fragile. He crouched, gloved fingers brushing lightly against the edges, as if afraid the truth might disappear if he touched it too firmly. "A pup," he muttered under his breath, voice low, almost careful. The realization settled slowly, like snow filling a hollow. She wasn't just surviving for herself, she was hunting, calculating, enduring, for something smaller, weaker, hidden somewhere beyond the tree line. That explained the tension in her stance, the extra caution, the way her eyes seemed to measure not just distance, but intent. Ethan straightened, his jaw tightening slightly beneath his beard. He had seen that look before, not in wolves, but in people. Parents who stood between danger and something they couldn't afford to lose. He left a smaller portion of meat that morning. Not out of fear of overfeeding, but out of respect. The balance had to remain untouched. Over the next week, the signs grew clearer. Sometimes the smaller tracks circled behind the larger ones, as if the pup was learning where it could step safely. Other times, they disappeared entirely, leaving only the mother's path. evidence of a boundary she refused to cross. Ethan never saw the pup, and somehow that felt right. The wolf, too, seemed to enforce the distance more strictly now. She no longer lingered even for a second after feeding. Her movements were sharper, quicker, protective. Once, when Ethan stepped out a fraction too early, she froze, not in fear, but in warning. Her body lowered slightly, eyes narrowing, a quiet signal that needed no sound. Ethan stopped immediately, hands open at his sides. "I'm not here for you," he said softly, though he knew she didn't understand the words, or the little one. But something in his tone, in the stillness of his posture, must have translated enough. After a long moment, she backed away, not turning her back until the trees swallowed her again. That night, Ethan sat by the fire longer than usual, the flames reflecting in his pale eyes. He thought about the pup, hidden somewhere in the cold, relying entirely on a mother who could not afford a single mistake. He thought about the way the wolf had chosen distance over risk, control over desperation. It reminded him of something he had buried. Trust, he realized, wasn't built by moving closer. Sometimes, it was built by knowing exactly how far to stay away. Outside, the forest remained silent, but somewhere beyond the dark line of trees, a mother watched, and a small life followed in her steps. The storm did not arrive gently. It came like a verdict. For 3 days, the forest howled under a sky that seemed to have forgotten mercy, wind tearing through the pines while snow fell thick enough to erase even the memory of paths. Ethan stayed inside his cabin, feeding the fire, listening to the walls creak like old bones under pressure. He had seen storms before, had walked through fire that roared louder than this, but there was something about this kind of silence afterward, the kind that came when nature decided who endured and who did not, that unsettled him in a way flames never had. On the 4th morning, the world stood still. Ethan stepped outside, boots sinking deep into untouched snow. The cold bit hard, sharp enough to sting his lungs with each breath. His eyes moved instinctively to the clearing. Tracks, only one set. The larger prints were there, familiar, steady, but the smaller ones were gone. Ethan's jaw tightened, a slow tension building beneath his beard. He didn't move closer this time. He didn't need to. The absence said enough. In his years as a firefighter, he had learned that sometimes what you didn't see told the truth more clearly than what you did. "Damn it," he muttered, voice low, carried away by the wind. That night, he didn't sleep much. The fire burned low, and his thoughts wandered where he didn't like to let them go. He had seen loss before, too many times, too close, and now, against all reason, the fate of a wild animal weighed on him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Morning came pale and quiet, then he heard it. A faint, deliberate scratching at the door. Not the wind, not branches, something intentional. Ethan froze for half a second, instincts sharpening. His body shifted automatically, the old training returning, alert, controlled, ready. He moved toward the door slowly, each step measured, hand hovering near the handle. When he opened it, the cold rushed in first. Then he saw her. The wolf stood just beyond the threshold, closer than she had ever dared before. Snow clung to her thick gray coat, her body tense but not poised to attack. Her amber eyes locked onto his, not with warning this time, but something else. Something raw. And at her feet, a small, broken shape. The pup. Up close, the reality struck harder. The little wolf was no more than a few months old, its fur matted with ice and dried blood. One of its hind legs bent at an unnatural angle, the injury unmistakable even without touch. Its chest rose and fell faintly, shallow breaths fighting against the cold. Ethan felt something twist deep in his chest. For a moment, the world narrowed. No storm, no forest, no past, just this fragile life hanging between survival and surrender. The wolf stepped back. Not far. Just enough. She did not turn away, did not bare her teeth, did not run. She simply waited. Ethan understood, not with logic, not with training, but with something older, something that lived beneath words. He had seen that look before, in smoke-filled hallways, in the eyes of people who had nothing left but one final, desperate hope. "You brought her here," he said quietly, his voice rough. The wolf's ears flicked, but she held her ground. Ethan knelt slowly, every movement deliberate. The cold seeped through his jeans, but he didn't notice. His hands, calloused and steady in every crisis he had ever faced, hesitated for the first time in years. Because this wasn't his world, and yet somehow he had been pulled into it. The pup didn't react when he touched it. Its body was too weak, too far gone to resist. Carefully, gently, he slid his hands beneath the small frame, lifting it with a care that bordered on reverence. Behind him, the wolf let out a low, strained sound. Not a growl, not a threat. Grief. Ethan swallowed hard. "I've got you," he murmured, though he didn't know if the words were meant for the pup or for the mother watching him. He stood, holding the fragile weight against his chest. The wolf took a step forward, then stopped, her body trembling with conflict. Instinct pulled her one way. Something else, something fragile and impossible, held her in place. Ethan met her gaze one last time. "I'll try," he said quietly. It wasn't a promise, just the truth he could offer, and somehow it was enough. The road out of the forest was barely a road anymore, just a narrow ribbon of ice and packed snow winding through silent trees, as if the mountain itself was reluctant to let anything leave. Ethan drove with both hands locked tight on the wheel, his knuckles pale beneath rough skin scarred from years of heat and hazard. The old truck groaned with every turn, tires slipping now and then before catching again. On the passenger seat beside him, the small transport crate rattled softly with each bump, a fragile life inside it fighting against time. The wolf pup, barely conscious, its breathing shallow and uneven, lay wrapped in a thick wool blanket Ethan had pulled from his own bed. Up close, the details were worse than he first thought. The broken leg was swollen, the fur around it stiff with frozen blood. Frostbite had begun to claim the edges of its ears. It was young. Too young to survive this alone. "Stay with me," Ethan muttered, his voice low, more command than comfort, the same tone he once used pulling strangers from burning buildings. "You don't get to quit yet." But this wasn't fire. There were no sirens, no team, no structure to rely on. Just a man, a road, and a promise he wasn't sure he had the right to make. 3 hours. That was what the nearest wildlife rescue center had told him. 3 hours across unstable roads, through stretches of wilderness where help was not a phone call away but a matter of luck. He had called ahead before leaving. The voice on the other end had been calm, controlled. Dr. Lillian Carter. She sounded like someone who had spent her life standing at the edge of life and loss and had learned not to flinch at either. When Ethan finally reached the center, the building stood low and practical against the snow, more function than form. The doors opened before he could knock. Dr. Lillian Carter stepped out to meet him. She was in her early 50s, tall and composed, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled into a loose knot at the back of her head. Her face carried fine lines earned not from age alone, but from years of focus, concern, and decisions that rarely had perfect outcomes. Her eyes, sharp, gray, and unwavering, moved immediately to the crate. "You're Ethan," she said, her voice steady, direct. No wasted words. He nodded once. "She brought it to your door?" Lillian asked as they moved inside, her tone shifting slightly, not disbelief but careful curiosity. Ethan hesitated. "Yeah." Lillian didn't respond right away. She had spent over 25 years working with injured wildlife, had seen bears tear through enclosures, hawks refuse to eat, deer collapse from stress, but this was something else. "It happens," she said finally, though the faint crease in her brow suggested how rarely. "Not often, but sometimes desperation changes instinct." Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and hay. Another man approached, younger, moving quickly but without panic. Daniel Reeves, late 20s, lean build, sandy blonde hair falling messily across his forehead, his face still carrying the softness of someone who had not yet been hardened by too many losses. His hands, though, were steady, trained, precise. "Let's get him in," Daniel said, already reaching for the crate. They worked fast. The pup was transferred onto a padded table, its small body barely reacting. Lillian examined the leg with careful hands, her expression tightening just enough to reveal the truth before she spoke it. "Compound fracture," she said quietly, "and hypothermia. Severe." Ethan stood back, arms crossed tightly over his chest as if holding himself together. "Will it make it?" he asked. Lillian glanced at him, measuring not just the question, but the man asking it. "It has a chance," she said, "but only if we move fast." That was enough. Hours passed like minutes and minutes like hours. Ethan remained there, silent, watching through glass as they worked. Fluids, heat, stabilization, procedures he didn't fully understand but recognized in spirit. The same fight, just a different battlefield. When Lillian finally stepped out, removing her gloves, there was exhaustion in her posture, but not defeat. "It's alive," she said simply. Ethan exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the moment he opened his door. But the weight didn't lift. Because somewhere, deep in the forest, a mother still waited. And promises, Ethan knew better than most, didn't always survive the distance between hope and reality. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, melting the edges of winter, softening the forest just enough to remind the living that survival had a cost. Ash lived. That alone felt like a quiet miracle. Weeks passed at the rescue center, and the fragile, broken pup Ethan had carried through the storm slowly became something stronger. His fur thickened into a dense gray coat streaked with darker lines along his back, his once clouded eyes now clear and alert. A sharp amber that mirrored his mother's. The injured leg healed under careful treatment, though it left a faint stiffness in his gait, a reminder written into bone. But what concerned Dr. Lillian Carter was not the body, it was the mind. "He doesn't fear us," she said one afternoon, standing beside Ethan as they watched Ash move inside the rehabilitation enclosure. Her voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. At his age, after this much human contact, that instinct should be stronger. Ash moved with curiosity rather than caution, his nose lifting toward sounds, his body relaxed in a way a wild wolf should never be around people. Daniel Reeves stood nearby, leaning lightly against the fence, arms folded. Even he had noticed it. "He watches us like we're part of the environment," Daniel added, "not a threat." Ethan didn't answer immediately. His gaze followed Ash as the young wolf paused, ears flicking toward a distant sound, then trotted forward with a quiet confidence that felt misplaced. "What does that mean?" Ethan finally asked, though he already knew. Lillian exhaled softly. "It means releasing him back into the wild would likely get him killed." The words landed without drama. Just truth. Ethan nodded once, slow, controlled. He had seen men walk into danger without fear before. It never ended well. "So what happens to him?" he asked. "There are sanctuaries," Lillian said. "Facilities built for animals that can't return. Safe, controlled. He would live, but not as he was meant to." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly beneath his beard. He pictured fences, limits, a life half-lived. That night, in the small motel room near the center, sleep didn't come easily. Ethan sat by the window, staring out into the dark, his reflection faint against the glass. He thought about the wolf, the mother, standing in the snow, choosing him when instinct said not to. He thought about the look in her eyes, and the promise he never truly made, but somehow still carried. By the time dawn came, the decision was already there. "I'll take him," Ethan said the next morning, his voice steady, leaving no space for doubt. Lillian studied him carefully. "This isn't a pet," she said. "You'd need certification, proper enclosure, protocols. You don't get to treat him like something he isn't." "I know," Ethan replied. And he did. The weeks that followed were filled with work, real work. Ethan studied, trained, built. The enclosure took shape on the edge of his land, a wide, carefully designed space of trees, rock, and running water. Not a cage, a boundary. A place where the wild could exist without being lost. When Ash finally arrived, larger now, stronger, he stepped out of the transport crate with cautious curiosity. His nose tested the air, his body low at first, then rising as he moved forward, exploring the space with quiet intensity. Ethan stayed back, always. Days passed, then weeks, and then one evening, as the setting sun painted the snow in deep gold and fading red, Ethan saw movement at the edge of the trees. She had returned. The wolf, older now, or perhaps simply worn by time, Her coat, carrying the marks of a hard season, survived. She did not look at Ethan, did not acknowledge the cabin. She moved toward the enclosure. Inside, Ash froze. Their eyes met. Time seemed to hold its breath. No sound, no movement, just recognition. The mother stood still, her body calm, her gaze steady. Ash mirrored her, sitting slowly, ears forward, as if something deep within him remembered what his mind could not fully grasp. Minutes passed, then, without warning, the wolf turned. No hesitation, no backward glance. She walked into the forest, her form dissolving into shadow and distance until she was gone. Ethan remained where he stood, the silence settling around him like falling snow. He understood then. He had not saved the wolf. He had not changed the wild. He had only been a place, a moment, where desperation had paused long enough to become something else. And the gift was never meant to be kept. In the quiet, after the storm, when the forest no longer roars but simply breathes, a man stands at the edge of what he cannot keep, and finally understands what it means to let go. This story was never about saving a wolf. It was about a moment, brief, fragile, when fear stepped aside and trust took its place. In life, not everything we care for is meant to stay. Some things come to us not to belong to it, but to change us. A stranger's kindness, a fleeting connection, a quiet act no one else sees. We don't always get to keep the Ash in our lives, but maybe we were never meant to. Maybe the real gift is who we become after we choose to care anyway. And somewhere, in the rhythm of your own life, between the noise, the worries, the things you carry silently, there may come a moment when someone or something needs your kindness without asking for it. When that moment comes, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be there. If this story touched something in you, even just a little, take a second to share it with someone who might need that reminder today. Leave a comment. What would you have done in Ethan's place? And if you believe the world still has room for quiet kindness like this, consider subscribing, because there are more stories waiting. Stories where even the smallest act can echo longer than we ever expect. May God watch over you, keep your heart steady in difficult times, and bless you with moments of unexpected grace, just like a knock at the door on a cold winter morning.